Chapter 37. The meaning of the firstborn. Exodus chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine. Exodus chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. The firstborn have an important place in biblical faith. This significance resembles the widely prevalent concept of primogeniture, and in some circles and nations, the eldest son invariably inherits everything. In England, for example, among the nobility, the eldest son inherits the estate, whether he is qualified or not. The same rule prevailed among most European royal lines. This is not the biblical view. According to numerous texts, the firstborn male belongs to God and was to be redeemed. Exodus chapter 13, verses 11 to 16, chapter 22, verses 29 and 30, chapter 34, verses 19 and 20, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 26, Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 19 and 20. Compare Romans chapter 11, verse 16. The firstborn son belonged to God, and his life was redeemed by a payment. With redemption came responsibility, and an irresponsible firstborn son could be set aside for another, as in the case of Israel, Esau, and Reuben. The firstborn stood for the whole, and he was a tithe to God. The validity of God's claim was recognized by the act of redemption. If godly, the firstborn received a double portion of the inheritance, according to Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 15 to 17. This double portion meant responsibility for the care of the parents and leadership in dealing with problems in the family and among kindred. The redemption price was 5 silver shekels, according to Numbers chapter 18, verse 16. The current price among Orthodox Jews is $5 US. Because the firstborn represented the whole family, he had a priestly function, because the priest is the people's representative to God. The Levitical priesthood functioned in relationship to the sanctuary and to civil government, to church and state in modern terms. The family priesthood functioned in relationship to family members and towards God. As Rule observed, it was an important principle because the firstborn were naturally the representatives of the entire community. It was part of God's covenant that, Ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. Exodus chapter 19, verse 6. This, we know, was a foreshadowing of the priestly character of the Christian Church as a body. It was, therefore, important to keep up the idea that the priesthood was a representative priesthood, and the rule as to the firstborn emphasized this. When, soon afterwards, the Levitical priesthood was formally established, the fact that the Levites were accepted as substitutes for the firstborn showed that they, in their turn, were representatives of the nation. Numbers chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, chapter 8, verses 13 to 18. Non-biblical primogeniture makes a difference between the sons and, in the landed property, goes to the eldest sons with no qualification on his part other than prior birth. It confers power and status. Biblical primogeniture, if we can use that term, confers responsibilities to the son. He belongs to God and, under God, exercises a religious function, a priestly office. Non-biblical primogeniture is a natural and civil fact which is primarily oriented towards the preservation of property and family powers. In Scripture, there is a dramatic difference. To be the firstborn is a religious fact. Hence, God declares, "Sanctify unto me all the firstborn." Verse 2. The firstborn of Egypt had just been slain by God to signify that Egypt was now set apart for judgment and ruin. This command to set apart all the firstborn would immediately bring that fact to mind with all Israel. Earlier, God had declared to Pharaoh, "Israel is my son, my firstborn, and I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, thy firstborn." Exodus chapter 4, verses 22 and 23. Pharaoh was thus clearly warned. There is another aspect to this. The firstborn has a responsibility towards all other sons and daughters. God, in declaring Israel to be his firstborn, was giving Israel a responsibility to himself and towards all other peoples. Failure to discharge this responsibility meant a priestly failure and judgment. Solomon, in the prayer at the dedication of the temple, asked God to give particular attention to the prayers of aliens from far countries who came there. 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 41 to 43, which indicates that Israel was then manifesting a firstborn's concern for other sons. Psalm 87 has in mind all the foreigners whose true citizenship is in the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of God. When later Pharisaism arose, the election of Israel per se, rather than of individuals out of every people, tongue, and nation, came to replace the earlier faith. Instead of God's firstborn, Israel under Pharisaism saw itself as an only begotten son, so that membership in Israel became necessary for salvation. The result was judgment. A like error among the peoples of Christendom is now bringing judgments which only a true priesthood can escape. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 to 24, we are told, "But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel." The true church is thus described as the church of the firstborn, that is, a church mindful of its priestly responsibility to all other peoples. The name firstborn means responsibility. The true church is thus more than a group coming together to worship. It is an assembly, an army dedicated to bringing all things into captivity to Christ, to the end that it may be proclaimed. "And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign for ever and ever." Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. Humanistic perspectives on primogeniture make the firstborn the privileged son. The biblical requirement is that he be the responsible son, and, if not responsible, he must be set aside. Hence, God declares, "Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine." Verse 2. These were all God's tithe, his firstfruits, so that, whether the domestic animals or the grain, all belonged to God. All of life must be God-centered, and most certainly the family. There is another aspect to this. God has spared the firstborn of Israel, not because of any merit on their part, but as an act of sovereign grace. He did it remembering his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a result of his judgments on Egypt, Israel was saved and delivered. Israel as a totality now owed its life and service to the Lord. Hence, in the person of its firstborn, it had to give itself to God's kingdom